Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Andrea Sato. I work at the Wilton Library on programs, adult programs, and I just want to say how pleased and excited we are to continue to partner with SpedNet on programs like these because I have a special ed child myself who's all grown up, but she still needs support, and I think all of these things are beneficial for a long time. So I hope you continue to come back to Wilton Library. We have a lot of great programs, and SpedNet continues to offer programs with us, and we're excited about that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eve Kessler.
Thanks, Andrea. So this is our first venture into coming back live. We've been on webinars for the whole time, and we figured that we'd try this and see, and of course it rained. But I hope you all know that all of our presentations and webinars live on our website, the videos of them, as well as the PowerPoints and all the materials that the presenters suggest, book recommendations and stuff. We are really happy to have Doug DeMassa here. He was canceled right before COVID, and so we're happy to have him back. This was the kind of presentation that we thought would be better in person. The importance of exercise and movement. Dr. John Rady, a psychiatrist and world-renowned authority on the effects of exercise on the brain, tells families to think of exercise as medication to optimize intellectual reasoning, increasing attention, and improving mood. For both inattentive and hyperactive kids with ADHD, exercise sharpens focus, increases time on task, decreases impulsivity, and primes kids for learning. Dr. DeMassa is here today to explain the impact of exercise on the brain and why it's so vital for our kids, especially those with attention and learning needs. Dr. DeMassa is a doctor of chiropractic who has trained in martial arts for over 35 years. Almost 20 years ago, he created Neurondo, a brain-based martial art that integrates physical movements with cognitive learning strategies. Dr. DeMassa is in private practice in Norwalk, where he teaches Neurondo and is an adjunct professor at the University of Bridgeport School of Chiropractic, where he teaches maternal and child health. I'd appreciate it if you silent your phones. As well as the library, we are partnering today with Wilton Public Schools, Wilton Youth Council, Free Play Matters Task Force, and Darien CPAC. With that, Doug, we're so happy to see you.
Let's get that back on. Oh, can we hear it? Yes. Okay. How come? Okay. So thank you, Eve. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And yeah, I just remember it was like, I guess it was 49 months ago when we canceled when I was first supposed to be doing this. So, and I guess I'm glad I'm going to be the first to start back in person again. So it's good to see y'all. So here I have the exercise prescription. I gotta be honest with you. I know Dr. Rady has this whole thing with the exercise is medicine, good, but there is a point in me that has a little bit of a kind of like cringe when I hear that. And the reason being is that with exercise as medicine, you kind of like puts you into a category where it's like limiting that exercise. And I want to open up our minds to a little bit more to what exercise can do and kind of like move into how movement transforms your child's brain. So the idea is that we actually have two approaches on the screen here. And we have a exercise prescription approach, which kind of gives you like a linear model of how to use exercise to help the brain. And then sometimes it's used in research because that's what we can measure, that's what we can look for, and this is what we're gonna achieve. But then in reality, what do we do? We actually are looking for them to move and how they exercise and how that exercise and that movement actually gives them the ability to learn. because we learn from our movements, and we learn that those movements are kind of, our cognition is embodied in our movements. So in actuality, today we're going to try and put these two together. So we're going to try and integrate movement, cognition, and learning together. And we're going to do this by defining exercise and exercise prescription, as well as looking at it from a embodied cognition approach, and then trying to blend those all together. The funny thing is, we do this naturally anyways. It's all together anyways. And so when I was looking at this article by Mavaliti, she really did a good job in identifying these two concepts that have been developing over time. One from it's almost like the linear approach, like I said, like research, and we're going to do some exercise, and we're going to try and get that blood going up to and oxygen getting to the brain. We're also trying to get the neurotransmitters working, but there is a component that is missing, which is this learning or cognitive component. So in this article, she actually put together how to kind of blend this together and also try to separate them out. And we're going to probably go through some of that as well today, which is interesting. But before we begin, I want to start us off with a little bit of a story, a Zen story. And in that regards, this way we can kind of keep all our options open. A lot of times, the reason why I said that the exercise prescription I cringe a little bit with it, is because I take a step back or pause with it, is because I don't want it to be considered just medicine. I want it to be expanded out, and we're going to go into that. So I want you to keep that as one option, and then there's another view perspective on it as well, and there's probably even more. So with this story, we'll go with there are three scholars. They do not walk into a bar. They're looking at a flag that is flapping in the wind. The first scholar will say that the flag is moving in the wind. The second scholar says, no, it's the wind that's moving the flag. And the third scholar will say that, why don't we just say that both the wind and the flag are moving? The Zen master hears this conversation and says, no, neither the flag nor the wind are moving. It's the mind that moves. So from that aspect, the idea is just to keep all these possibilities in your mind when you're doing these exercises. And it gives you a flexibility to be able to shift in and out of whatever approach you want to choose to do. And that's really what you want to do. You want to be able to have that flexibility, our own cognitive flexibility, to be able to jump in and out when you see that opportunity to actually enhance the learning process. So that's why it was when we look at exercise prescription, we're looking at a specific targeted illness, and then we're going to create specific exercises for that illness or condition. And from here, we got a whole bunch of conditions that can be definitely improved with exercise. I didn't put up, number one, the article didn't talk about ADHD or learning disabilities or behavioral disorders. And in part, I think it's good because it gives us a little bit of a pause on it, because we're also looking at those as developmental issues as well. And so with development, also with cognition, you kind of want to address it in a different way. So like I said, exercise is medicine, kind of gives you imparts this narrowed vision on it, and I want to expand it. So we look at exercise just from a physical activity standpoint, and defining it. Any bodily movement produced by a skeletal muscle that requires energy is a physical activity. So we can do gardening, hiking, running, walking, going through, and all these activities can be opportunities for learning. And the idea is to then take that opportunity to introduce some cognitive thought process. And this is where we need to start to blend it. But the problem with physical activity doesn't give you enough input sometimes. So you need to increase it and increase the intensity. And that's when we start to get into physical exercise, where you're looking at changing some kind of component, like whether it's cardiovascular fitness, whether it's body composition, whether it's your muscular strength, or your conditioning. So we start to get into physical exercise. Exercise prescription, to me, you start getting a little bit more into the therapeutic realm, where you're actually focusing on some areas. So then we start looking at targeting areas into the brain, or even just areas of dysfunction where you want to focus your attention. So sometimes with ADHD, there are some comorbidities that go along with it, so that actually then affects the way that they move and their coordination. From that, we can start to say that maybe there's a delay in their ability to do an action, which then that action then impedes them from actually having that cognitive experience. So by helping them understand how to move correctly, you actually open up the opportunity for them to improve their cognition. The problem is that you can't just focus on the exercise and expect the exercise just to fix it. You have to actually lead them through it. So it's like you help them with the movement pattern, and then hopefully try to influence the way that whatever cognitive component you want has to be then integrated within that movement at the same time. So that's where it gets a little bit more focused, and can also be a part of the whole picture. Then the idea is to take that focus and then try to expand it into an activity that they can do at home as well. So I had this slide in here because I just thought it was great to kind of like keep your minds open to what just exercise is, and that moves into this whole movement. And we don't want to just simply define it as medicine. We want to expand it out into a whole bunch of other avenues. This article, when the whole exercise medicine came out back in 2007, there was some other backlash and some other articles that came out that were saying that we can't just call it medicine. We got to call it, all these other things. And so I'm not the only one that's saying these things. And from this, it was just interesting to see the connection between this exercise as recreation, not medicine article that Andy Smith did. He quoted Lawrence van der Post, which was a friend of Carl Jung. And it was interesting. I like it because Jung was really good at symbolism and understanding these symbolism and how we have these connections. And I think our movements and our patterns of movement, all is mapped into these symbols. And these symbols can be changed, and these symbols are different for every person. So it's like you can't give a specific saying, okay, this is going to be the meaning for this. You have to find out why, find out from the individual what it means to them in order for this to occur. But in the same token, we start to say that fire is not just energy. So Jung asked this professor, what does fire mean to you? And the professor kind of like blew him off, and it was just like, this is just too simple of a question for me to even answer. But I'll just tell you, it's energy. And van der Post was in on this conversation, and he writes in the book saying that, no, fire is not just energy. There's so much more meaning to fire. And fire is light in the darkness, safety against the beast. It's warmth against the cold. It's all these things and many more things before it becomes an abstract of energy in the mind of a professor, however eminent. So this is where I want us to get past the whole thing and open our minds to how much, how we can actually expand upon exercise. So exercise is great. More than medicine, it's leisure. So we can find this in leisure. We can find it in recreation. We can find it in sports, and we can find it in play. Play is where it really is, too. Because when we find play, they're joyful, they're happy, they're having a good time. That's the moment that we can then go into it. Sometimes I gotta say that when we say you gotta do your exercise, because it's, you gotta take it like it's your medicine. You want to kind of like, I think we need to change that a little bit and then say, we want to have them do an exercise or let's say play and learn from that. So rather than just forcing them to always go into it, I want them to actually embody it, their exercise into their life. So the idea is to find a passion or an activity that they're passionate about so that then we can use that. It changes from time to time. I do martial arts. Not every kid's gonna like martial arts, okay? And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So we gotta find some other avenues that they can actually use to boost their activity level. And when they find that passion, they don't stop. It's just, they keep going with it. So it's that's where we can then add in all the cognitive stuff that goes along with it. So exercise is really learning, and that is going to be movement. I choose the word movement over exercise a lot of times because movement is both a sensory and a motor experience. And from that action, you're just not just doing a movement to do a movement here, but you're also feeling it. You're thinking about it internally. You're actually, it also includes your external environment to go along with you. You can feel a movement. You can, words can move you. Songs can move you. Art can move you. All these things then can be embodied within a movement. And that's what we have to do. We got to get back to the point where it's all done at the same time. But we like to separate everything, don't we? And this is where embodied cognition starts to come in. Embodied cognition was interesting. It's a little bit more abstract. So from that abstraction, it's not as clear-cut as your exercise prescription. Because exercise prescription or just exercise in general is pretty cut and dry. And we can just say, okay, you're going to do running, or you're going to do jumping, or you're going to do this activity, and then we're going to measure your heart rate, we can measure your breathing, we can measure all this stuff, we can measure the strength, and we can see the outcomes from this. Embodied cognition is a little bit different, and this is where it's a little bit more abstract. Where they embody the movement, the learning process through the movements, okay? And the most interesting thing is that we actually offload the information into the surrounding environment that we are in. So, you guys are in this chair learning, listening to me, and from that position, and in the surrounding environment right here, you are now taking this all in at the same time, subconsciously. So another way I can actually express this really and clarify this a little bit more easily is when you lose your keys. What do? You retrace your steps, right? Why do you do that? What are you doing? You're walking and you're doing a movement through the environment that stimulates the neurons that were already there to then help you recall what's going on. That's what they're doing with embodied cognition. And the other end of that is like when we say they offload it, it's easier for the brain to handle it. And we talk about working memory with ADHD. It's easier for them to offload the information into our environment so that they can then ease the burden on their brain and the function. So if we can teach them that kind of a strategy, it actually works really well. So the increase in their retention is much better. I can also explain that one a little bit more too. You ask your child when they come home from their activity or school or whatever, and then you say, hey, what'd you do today? And you go, oh. And you're like, come on, you were spent 6 hours at school. What did you do? Oh. But I bet you if you take that child, and you put them in the classroom, sit them in their seat that they were in, and you ask them, they'll be able to recall because they've offloaded all the information into that classroom. And I've seen it happen too with me when the kids come in, into the office. And let's say if I'm in a different space, like over at the Y, too, and I had them coming in there, I have to kind of like recreate the office for them, and then all of a sudden the memories start to come back. And during COVID, I had also saw them at their houses, and so now I had to recreate the office in their house, and all of a sudden all the flood of memory comes back. And so this is where embodied cognition comes into play. The goal really is to take the exercise prescription and all the exercises, right, and also add in this embodied cognition as well at the same time. But what we end up doing is we end up still separating it. We do the exercise and then we do the cognition. And that's what we're going to look at here. So behind this exercise prescription is we have this embodied cognition. So I kind of look at it as just like yin yang. So you put them together, and they are basically the same, one, but we separate it out because that's how we understand it. And like I was saying before, what we end up doing is we end up doing some exercise, and then we do cognition. Exercise, cognition. So we're going to look at some studies that kind of do that. So from here, what does exercise do? So a majority of the exercise that they do in the research is pretty much aerobic because it's easy. Most people can do it, and so it's measurable that way. It's harder to do other stuff because then you have a bunch of other variables involved. So again, that's the reason why I think cycling and running and walking are majority you'll find in a lot of the exercise research. But that doesn't mean that you just have to do those things. It's just what's probably most easily done by everybody. So, but what we can do is understand from an aerobic exercise capacity is that you are nourishing the brain. You're also allowing for neuroplasticity, and you're also learning how, or helping the neuroendocrine system as well. So what happens is you're increasing blood flow and oxygenation. Think about it, you're increasing your heart rate. And then as you increase your heart rate, you increase the amount of blood flow that's coming out. That blood flow then it pushes up and gets to the brain. Over time, you start to build more vessels, more arteries, and that in and of itself brings more oxygen and blood flow to the brain as well. So over the long term, you can do this. This actually happens even after one bout of exercise. So you can have this happen just by doing one 20-minute workout. And so, and the idea is really for us to be getting 30 minutes a day. It really is what they were trying to get to. And I think for kids, we really should get them, an hour to more a day. Particularly if we really look at what COVID has brought, kind of like the decrease in activity. Also with, even the schooling is majority is done sitting. And my whole thought process is that really schools shouldn't really be sitting, and we should be really having them do activities. Going back to what I was saying before about asking kids on how their day was and what they did. I sometimes do that to some of the students and some of the patients I see as well. So at the Y, I had asked this one kid, all right, what's your favorite activity? Of course, he says recess. And the reason why was because he can run around and he's not, he can just play and have fun. And he was a first grader. So, and then he said, then I said, well, what else? All right, besides recess, what else do you like? And so he was just like, I don't know. He goes, there was this one time in gym that we did math and gym at the same time. He goes, that was I like that. And that's what I'm trying to get at in this lecture, is really that's where it should be. All this learning, we should really taking gym class and putting it in the schools where the gym becomes an area where we can take from the academics and then put those academics into their gym class. Ideally, it would be like 3 times a day, I would think, and we can focus it in a sense of where they do the gym, have gym 3 times a day, but then integrated with their math, their language, and any other activity or any other academic that we needed to put in. But anyways, so all that would be able to help increase their cognition because they'll be learning it while they're moving. And that's the reason this neuroplasticity, yes, just doing exercise, just doing aerobic exercise, or just saying go for a run will increase your ability to have these neurotropic factors. However, if you don't do any cognition with it, it doesn't build those branches. So that's where I think we need to kind of like focus in. That's where the cognition comes in. Cortisol threshold, and this all comes into intensity now. We're going to talk about that as well. Moderate intensity, short or long duration increases attention. So high intensity, long duration, decline in executive function. So your intensity does matter. So sometimes we see that if you do a high intensity, this is with kids with autism, and we're going to look at that too, but if we do a high intensity, we may be able to decrease some of their behaviors. And that's because you kind of like ran the system a little bit and they're a little exhausted. So, but at the same time, because of that, you decrease those behaviors, you then start to see that they actually can focus because now you flooded their nervous system with a bunch of sensory barrage. And then from there, it kind of like quells the system so that they actually can focus. And then that's when you can add in the learning or the cognitive component. So cortisol threshold, there is a point where you want the cortisol to come in. Cortisol does activate the brain and give your brain, so a little bit of a stress is actually beneficial because then it actually can activate the brain to be a little bit more alert as well. But if you overdo it, you now decline, and then you hit into a point where, so I think that's where the moderate intensity or of short or long duration kind of gives you better options for doing the improving attention. Okay, aerobic exercise. This is where Adele Diamond, she's up in Canada. She does a lot of work with executive functioning, with ADHD and learning. She again says that you really need aerobic exercise or resistive training without a cognitive component produces little or no executive function benefit. So again, we have to get them cognitively involved in understanding what it is. Now, she also goes into a little bit more with this and gives a reasoning why you sometimes can just do an exercise and you'll see a benefit in the cognition. And that's the learning curve. It's like if I give a student a new exercise to do, and this is where I think if we look into some like brain-based exercises or crossing midline or coordination exercises or retained infant reflex exercises, I think what you're really doing is that you're introducing a challenge, a motor coordination challenge that actually forces the brain to actually think about what they have to do. And then once you hit that plateau and once they learned it, now you have to challenge the system again. But once they hit and learned it, they hit a plateau, and then you won't see that increase anymore. So that's where the cognitive action starts to come in again. So you have to constantly give them more and more complex activities to do. I'll be biased towards martial arts. There's a never-ending motor coordination skills that need to be refined at all times. So it's because of the levels, you learn it at one level and then you have to refine it at another level, and there's always constant learning. So and it hits all the areas of working memory, of being able to hold on to one concept while you're doing another one, or in combinations of trying to do short-term memory sequencing, or in forms, how we end up doing a lot of motor sequencing. We also, I include into the forms, which I'll demonstrate later, how I use the environment to help them as well, as I had mentioned before. And then inhibition. Another part of let's just take running, for instance, how we can keep them on task and how it helps initially is because how do you sustain the running? You have to have some mental effort to keep your mind focused on that running, okay? And to be able to sustain for a longer period of time. It's not just your aerobic endurance, it's also your mental effort that keeps you focused on it. So that's actually, instead of stopping, you're staying focused on trying to keep going. So there's another component to that running, which is that's the cognitive component that helps with the inhibition of going, okay, I'm tired, I feel my heart rate, this is what usually happens, I feel my heart rate racing, I don't like that, I'm stopping. So the goal then would be to teach them to go a little bit further and say, okay, that's normal, you're within range, you're still able to talk to me, you're still in a zone where you're okay, and we can push forward. So a lot of that is also learning, and that learning curve also helps you with your understanding, or helps them with their understanding, and that's where I think some of this happens. Cognitive flexibility is being able to, I do a lot of it with the martial arts. Cognitive flexibility is being able to take one action, and then I tend to have them do a mirror image of the action. So then we teach them one way, and then we flip it, and then so they get used to one way. This also goes on inhibition. They get used to doing it one way, and then we create a bias to that one action, and now they have to inhibit that action and then be able to flip and go to the other side. So it also allows for different changes. There's rules that happen in martial arts, the pattern rules that I create, so that when they go in, they know that the rule is, let's say, just turning to the left, okay? But then when they move to the next belt, I'll say, okay, now the rules change, you gotta go to the right. So it starts to help with those cognitive flexibility. So it's like, I can express this like in like a gym class or something. You're doing one activity where you're bouncing, dribbling a basketball with one hand, and then eventually you have to then learn to dribble it with the other hand, right? So, and from one aspect, you want to help them be able to do that, and I think we can do that more simply, or we also can do that integratively within our school in gym classes. So once we start to get more increase in working memory, increase in inhibitions, try to stay on task, and as well as developing this cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility also, Stroop test is another example of that, is where your cognitive flexibility of being able to stay on task, or you name a color, all the colors are named, and then let's say red was red colored, and then blue is blue colored. So you say that, and that's easy. And then you change it up so the word red is in blue, but they have to say the color. So it kind of like helps you that's another way of just expressing how to change the rules a little bit, to help build some of that flexibility. So when you're starting to be able to do that, that allows for the higher executive functions like reasoning, problem solving, and planning to occur. So it's like we build on a exercise foundation, of physical movement foundation. Then from that movement foundation, we start to build onto these core executive functions, and then we can go to a higher level of even more executive functioning, such as reasoning, problem solving, and planning. So there's another way to activate certain brains, and it's called priming. You can, so in some regards, we can look at exercise to prime the brain. We could do it in a global way, like this example is aerobic exercise was priming. So we can do walking, running, treadmill, this just in a general sense. So what are you guys doing when we're doing the priming? Let's use your working memories now. When you're doing this, what are we doing? We're increasing blood flow. We're bringing that up. We're increasing the neurotropic factors, right? And we're allowing for those neurotransmitters to be flooded. That then supports all the brain areas, okay, in general sense. And now we have to add in the cognition. So the timing prior to cognition and cognitive learning. Maybe do this, and this is what you'll probably see in some of the articles back there, that doing morning exercise for them prior to going to school has been beneficial. And what you're doing is you're doing this exercise, you're flooding the brain with all these nutrients, and then you're doing a cognitive exercise of going to school afterwards. Okay, so there's a positive there. Dosage really should be like a colon, but duration and frequency, how much, how long, and how many times. But that depends on the intensity, it depends on the child, it depends on their ability. So there is a thing where we can sit there, and for adults, typically we do, to find out maximum heart rate, we go 220 minus their age, and then you go 60% of that. It doesn't really equate too well with children. And I rather not do it that way. I rather do it through perceived exertion. So kind of like watching what they're doing. Are they laughing? Are they having a good time? Are they breathing a little heavy, but can still talk? You know, those kind of things are really more of the factors that you want to look for, so that so you know where they are. If they're not breathing that heavy and they're not really sweating that much, and maybe you're not getting enough out of it, you know, they're not getting that input. But at the same time, they may not be accustomed to a higher level of heart rate. So they may, again, get a little bit like worried, or that their heart rate is pounding. I've had a couple of them as well, and we had to just slowly work them up so they get comfortable with that as well. So I think in some regards, this is dosage. It really depends on the individual and the intensity. But like I said, lower intensity requires longer duration, maybe greater than 30 minutes. This makes kind of like total sense. Moderate intensity requires about 20 to 30 minutes of sustained activity, and high intensity requires 4 to 5 minutes of sustained activity. Unless they want to do the high intensity, I would not, you know, I would just like take it by at each individual. Some kids will want to do the high intensity, and especially maybe if it's only like 4 to 5 minutes. But again, we look at each individual and we try to see if we can improve them that way. So what is the reality of this exercise priming? So we can have some mixed results with this. And like I said, it all depends on the individual. We have low to moderate intensity improved executive functioning, memory and attention. High intensity improved inhibition. We were talking about that before. And negative results, decline in cognitive function if you overdo it. That could be under or over stimulation. If you don't stimulate them enough, you're not going to get that improvement. If you overdo it, you're going to have the same issue. So there is a Goldilocks point. Duration intensity depends on the individual, as I said. Short-lived, 30-minute window. Some say that function, that exercise only gives you a 30-minute window afterwards. So if we're looking at it from a standpoint of I'm going to do exercise first, and then I'm going to do cognition second, then you're looking at possibly only a 30-minute window. But I kind of look at that as more in the research, and they're looking at a specific exercise. And I think over the long run, you'll start to see that window get a little bit more, because you've got to think about it this way. The more you exercise, the more your cardiovascular system works better, right? And so at rest, you're not working as hard. and it doesn't take as much to get the blood to be pumped throughout the whole system. So I think in the long run, you're actually going to get a larger window than just 30 minutes. Lack of performing relevant tasks. So some of the negative aspects of it too, if you're not doing that cognitive task going along with it, you may miss the window of improving the executive function. You may get the brain rush, and you get all the neurotransmitters working, but we're going to be looking at not getting that that cognitive response. So we look at trying to blend them again. See, there's a positive. So this was a systematic review that looked at exercise with autism spectrum disorders, and they saw that they were looking specifically at their stereotypic behaviors, and the one study that didn't show an improvement or positive relationship was the study where there was only 9 kids in it, and 5 of the kids showed positive. So there really wasn't any statistical difference. And then 2 of the kids that didn't show any results or any differences didn't do the exercises as prescribed. So and therefore it was just it's a small study. It gives us a little bit of an insight into it. But I think the big take home is if you look at this from a bigger picture, what are we doing? We're doing a whole bunch of different activities, right? And they're still getting the same result. And so I think when we look at it, it doesn't have to be a specific exercise. It could be any kind of activity that we can utilize. And that if anything, that's the take home that I want you to have. You can find this in anything, in any activity. And so we can create any activity, and their intensity is also different from vigorous to moderate to low. So this kind of gives you a little bit of a idea that what I was talking about before really happens to be the individual. And if we can find that activity that individual likes, or multiple activities, and then we can then place that in duration, 15 to 90 minutes. The martial arts, I was paying attention a little bit more to that one, but they slowly increased in time and the amount. So initially they did like 30 minutes, 4 days a week, and then they moved to 90 minutes. It makes sense in martial arts because initially when you're learning, you only focus on a little bit of the movements, and you try to refine those movements, and then you move and you start building. And that's the beauty behind martial arts, because you build upon what you've already previously learned. And that's where their working memory and recall and all the cognitive components that goes along with it with the martial arts and the discipline. There's a whole structure to it. There's also the rewards too of getting your belt and earning your stripes, and the positive reinforcements that go along with it as well. So that's where I feel like martial arts kind of gives you the whole picture, or the whole program of what you really need to do. So all right, so length was any time between there. So if we're still looking at it from an exercise and versus embodied cognition, we can separate those out and say that the exercises kind of help them decrease their stereotypic behaviors. It also, when you do that, it kind of like help the brain kind of be able to focus, and then you can add in the cognition, and then because their bodies were a little bit more, I'd say, not, how would I describe it? When they have these motor stereotypies and moving around and all these things are moving, those are all sensory inputs that are coming into their system, and it's hard to discern what else is in there because all the information coming in is the same relevance, let's say. So it's almost like fuzz on a TV screen, And so when you kind of like clear those out, you clear the fuzz, and the picture becomes a little bit better and clearer. And so from there, their efficiency improves. And then with their efficiency improving, their neurophysiology, as long as their physiology is improving, you can see the better coordination in their body, and you can see that that's the point where you can actually cognitively reach them. I'll give you an example. I have a student or a child that comes in to see me. He does get wound up into these motor loops that he just gets caught in. And I have taught him to do forms, which is a sequence of movements that he then does. I have tape put on the floor so that he can know where to put his feet. And so, because he does have dyspraxia. And so when he's in those motor loops, which constantly are challenging, you can't reach him cognitively. So the idea is you go in, you start giving him, I have to help him to get through all those movements, but then I have him do all the sequence of movements. And as we keep doing it, you could start to see that he can predict the movement that's coming ahead. So we're activating frontal lobe. And then from that prediction, he can then inhibit the action. So the goal is really to go from a passive to an active movement, because when I get them to do active, now I'm integrating their frontal lobes. Then once I can get that inhibition happening, because it doesn't always have to be like a vigorous exercise. So that's what I'm also showing you, that by doing a specific sequence that he learned and he knows and he can predict, it then takes him away from all the motor stereotypies that are blocking him. So then once I start doing all those movements with him, it takes about like three times the sequence is 24 moves. It's a repetitive sequence, but it follows throughout the whole room. And then once that happens, over about like 3 times, you start to see him starting to predict, because even with the dyspraxia, you can see where he's trying to do a punch, he's trying to do a block and a punch, and doing the kick that's going to follow. So then once he starts doing that, then all of a sudden you start to see, you can reach him cognitively, you can talk to him, he's more engaged, he follows instructions, and it's creates a better learning environment for him as well. So that's where all these things start to work. Yes. So, I always talk about muscle memory, and it's kind of funny. We tend to, again, I think that's us separating everything. But it's the muscle memory is a coordination of the muscle with the brain. So what happens is it becomes an automatic reflex, but it's still in a volitional action. So once you start going through muscle memory, it kind of like, it's almost like a little bit like the embodied cognition. You put yourself into that movement, and then you start to realize what's going on, and then you can just naturally do the action. You recall it. So I think muscle memory, we tend to think that it's in the muscle because we say muscle memory, but it's into your whole system. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes, that's the neuroplasticity that's occurring, because we're trying to, when we do a new action or learn a new movement, you're creating new synapses in the brain that actually allow you to do that. And then you're also at the same time inhibiting other motor pathways that are occurring at the same time. So you may be, by doing the new motor pathway, you're actually inhibiting some old other possibly reflexive actions or other motor patterns that may be not what you want to do. And I'll speak to that, but go on. I agree. I think ballroom dance, that's why I said martial arts is not only the answer. I think dancing has a great potential. I think all sports have great potential to be able to do this. I think what happens is a lot of times I see with dancing, typically they only spin one direction. And maybe sometimes they only focus on one action. Yeah, and then you forget you can add that would be where you would say Neuron Do would like fit in there, is to be able to sit there and flip and say, okay, now it's your turn to lead, and or you're now going to not dance in this position, you're now going to dance in this position, and that would be the cognitive flexibility, that would be the inhibition, that would be all the working memory too, because you have to remember what the steps were prior to on this side, and then you switch it and you go to the other side, and then you go ahead. So I do see that you can do that in like multiple sports, but that's not how we typically do the sports. We do typically, like, let's say it's the same action. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that also plays a part of the cognition. So the team part of it is a really important factor. That's the socialization part of it, which then feeds into the whole movement, and it also actually helps boost them to continue rather than just doing it on their own. And I think that you're bringing up a lot of points that are really beneficial, and the reason why those team sports can really be helpful in doing this, and that's why it would be. The sad part is too, and I think about some of this, is that sometimes the team sports, they kind of exclude those that aren't good enough. And a lot of kids that we talk about that have ADHD and have all these learning disabilities, they also have coordination issues. And that, a lot of them, someone that I work with, and I'm like, you're doing so well, yeah, but I'm not an athlete. I'm not an athletic kid, is what I hear. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You can be an athlete. You don't have, and I think that's the other end of it, is like sometimes that we need to break those barriers for them so that they can really start to kind of like own in on their own sport kind of thing. Yes. No, that's fine. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Sometimes it's good to help them just find a little bit of success in something, and then build upon that. I know that sounds a little bit too general, but the idea is to really show them that they can actually improve. And it's interesting to me, because sometimes it's a lot of kids, they start out at white belt, and it's really, white belt sometimes is the hardest belt. And Fran will say it's kind of hard because you're learning a new language. You're learning a new language, because I do it's Taekwondo language, but Taekwondo also comes from Korea, so I'll also speak in Korean. So there's like a whole bunch of different things that are going on. So I try to simplify it so that they see that success in little bit increments, and then we can then come back and say, hey, you know what? When they find something that's hard and they find it challenging, and they're like, I can't do this. You can always go back and say, hey, look, you've made the improvements here. We can do it here as well. So the more that you can like build that, and that's also that working memory, pulling that back, pulling that recall, so that they can sit there and say that, okay, I was able to get through. Like a lot of times my yellow belts will say, I don't want to do this, and I'm like, really, this is really hard. I don't want to do it. And I'm like, well, look where you went. You went from white to yellow. You already went through this, and you'll, even though this is new and it's a little more challenging, you're going to do the same thing that you did when you went from white to yellow. Yep. Martial arts is a good component to do because it's individual. So you're really focused on how your improvement is going versus a team aspect of it. So like individual events, even running, is another important, like a track or a running team. You get the team sport, but you're also doing it individually. So you can then map your improvement, not map your improvement to others. So I think the more that you start to look at those areas, I think you'll find that he'll feel more confident. And that's really the other key, is you'll feel more confident. Yeah. And the more that you have that confidence, it really, really helps. So yeah. I'll talk to, let's see, I'll also talk to the whole fact of like adults versus children doing this. And Fran had said that she did my martial art, and it was really complicated. Adults look at things differently than kids. Kids just, it's amazing. I give them so much, and it's amazing how much they absorb, and they do it subconsciously. And my goal is to try and get them to understand it consciously. But adults, sometimes we get stuck in our own ways, and we go, the kid will just do the action. And this is where I think sometimes it's good, even with the coordination, just let them do the action. Don't worry about how it comes out. Whereas when I work with adults, a lot of times the adults will sit there, am I doing it correctly? Am I footing it? And I'm like, just do it. Just do the exercise. Just do it. It doesn't matter. It'll form. And that's why I call the forms, because they form. You got to understand that initially you don't have the coordination to do it, okay? You haven't trained your muscles that way. And so as you're doing the movements, you will then form yourself into doing the movements more appropriately and more coordinated, with better posture, better strength. And each time you do that, that's where you start to build upon. So a lot of times I look at it from a standpoint, I know from like a therapeutic standpoint, we sit there and we're like, okay, you're not doing the exercises correctly. We need to make sure that you tighten your stomach here, and you keep your body's structure, shoulders this way. You start focusing all on that little things, then you miss the whole global picture of everything. And so when you start from a point where you're just like, okay, just see what happens, and then we move from there, you get all the, to be honest with you, you get all the errors. And you want the errors, because then with the errors comes cognition. So I was just doing this with one of my brown belts who's trying to get to black belt, okay? And we do the forms one way, and then we do the forms another way. The opposite, you got a mirror image of it. And he gets, every brown belt does this. And even still, what happens is they mix up which way is which, okay? And I'll say, okay, I want you to do the mirror image of this form. And they're supposed to remember which one is the way I taught them, and which way is the mirror image. And they flip back and forth, so it's not as easy as what you think it is. And he ends up, I was like, all right, do it the regular way. So he ends up doing it the mirror way. And he doesn't realize this until the end. He's like, what? How that? I thought I was doing it regular. I thought I was doing it the other way. And it happens. I've also seen it happen with adults that I've taught. I will, you know what, I'm going to demonstrate that since we're already there. So the idea is, I had one adult. We teach the form. I'll do it to your directions. So if so, to our left is A. To the right is B. To the front here we call C, and behind us would be D. Now I do it that way. It's opposite of what they do in Taekwondo, to be honest with you, and that's because of the way that they look at the compass. So anyways, I did it to the way that we learn the alphabet. And because the reason being is, I'm going to go to A first and do a down block and then a punch. Then I'm going to go to B, so I'm following a sequence. Then I'm going to go to C, and then I'm going to go to D. Okay? So we drill that in for white belt. And it was interesting, and invariably this happens not only just in children, but it also happens in adults. In children, I think it just happens. And it was interesting to see it happen in adults too. But eventually what happens is I then teach them yellow belt, and it goes opposite. And then we start doing that to the right. And if we do that to the right, the form, it's a totally different form too. And we spin them to the right. Eventually what happens is they think that I taught them the first form to the right. And that's the brain that gets confused between it. So the idea is to tease that out for them so they can actually understand and control their actions, control the inhibitions, and work on that cognitive flexibility. So in that regards, I've also seen adults do that, and they're like, wait a minute. And that's why I put the labels on the walls sometimes too, so that they can realize that, yeah, oh wait, A is over there. And so that it can be flipped around pretty easily. So in that regards, it's a little bit more complex, but adults, again, like I see them, they try to get too involved into the specifics. And with children, they just focus on just having fun with it, and it just absorbs much easier. And that's why in the beginning of the lecture, I was like, I cringed a little bit when I said exercise with prescription. And that was the whole reasoning, is because when you watch kids do this, if you just let them play and you let them learn with the play and you kind of like guide them, it just absorbs so quickly. In that regards. So as you saw before too, I labeled the walls this way, and then what happens is when I said during COVID this really was where was a challenge. And we went to their houses and we were able to sit there and reorganize everything. And then I was like, all right, where's A? Where's B? And they're like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, here, there's A, there's B, there's C, there's D. All right, let's go. And then all of a sudden, all comes back. So yeah, there's a good component to this, and I'm explaining it in my terms or the way I do it. But like I said, I don't want you to be limited into just thinking it's just martial arts. There's a whole bunch of other activities. I mean, I think there's people that go into art, they go into performance art, and they do other things. Dance, you have a whole bunch of other activities that they can do. I don't want you to feel like you're limited to martial arts. So I just know martial arts because I've been doing it since I was 7. So it's just second nature to me. So, and I can see the connections that I can make from the martial arts because it's in my wheelhouse. So I can then sit there and I can then just like throw in all these different things, these cognitive kind of cognitive components of like working memory and cognitive flexibility and challenge them that way, only because that's what I'm aware of. So I think Fran had hit upon it too. It's like if we started to integrate this in physical ed or into sports, I think we can also achieve the same thing for to maximize this to everybody. So, anyways, and the idea too is to create it so there's an inclusion too. I want all kids to feel like they can. I don't want it to feel like it's a medicine that they have to take, because that's, again, it's medicine. You have to take it, right? it's an exercise. You have to do your exercise. I don't, in some regards, I want them to go, I want to, Fran, do you mind if I mention Ian? With Ian, I'm going to beat you today. His motivation is so that he, when he runs, he wants to beat me. That's the exercise. It's not about exercise for him. It's a sport. And we have to do the whole entire, announcing of the sports and the announcement of the lanes and everything like that to include all this. That's what motivates them, not that we have to do an exercise. Because if I say we're going to do an exercise, forget it. I don't want to do it. But you want to race? Absolutely, let's go. So I think that's the part behind it that I really wanted to put forth. So some of the things that we were talking about was with working memory, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility, passion. Passion and joyfulness is really the big key with this. That's where you're going to get them to just do the action, or they're just going to have fun doing it. Diverse physical activity, like I said, even with martial arts, I really only tell them to do it once a week with me if they were going to do it, okay? And because I really want them to branch out and do other activities. I want them to run, I want them to swim, I want them to do the hiking, I want them to do all this other stuff. In part two, I don't want them to do, a lot of times if you go to a martial arts studio, they sign you up and then you have to do, you're like, okay, I'm signed up, I'm locked in for a year, and I feel like I have to go every day. You're going to burn that kid out because it's the same thing. The idea is you want them to do, like when I do it, I like to teach them the movements and then let the movements absorb through the week. A lot of times, even preschoolers, I have a preschool program at the Y too, and the preschoolers sometimes they're parents will say, "Oh, my kid just loves it. They want to do more." I'm like, no, just let them want to do it because they're having fun with it. But if the moment that we start, doing too much of it, that's the moment they're going to turn off and go, "Oh, this is work. I don't want to do it." So that was the biggest key that I wanted to bring forth, and I think I did it. Hopefully, yes. Strategic behaviors. We can look at complex motor coordination. We build upon the complex motor coordination and adapting to changing conditions. Adele Diamond also gives us some guidelines that are similar to this. Need to cognitively engage during activity. We talked about that. You improve on the skills that you practice. So a lot of this stuff is also sports specific. I say sports specific. My background is in sports biology, it led me right into chiropractic school. That was the reason why I chose it. And I also chose it because all my sciences had to be related to sports, which was really cool. So my chemistry teachers didn't like it, but oh well. You improve on the skills that you practice. So the idea is if you're only doing a specific exercise for a specific target, you're only going to improve that area. And that's not what you really want to do. You really want to do is target the whole brain. And we're going to see that in the last slide. But you really want to start targeting the whole brain. You want to keep your focus on it, but you also want to keep the support of all the rest of the areas. So if you focus on one area and you're only going to target, coordination, or just let's say you can even target a specific exercise. I'm going to think about like retained exercises at this point. Some of those exercises that they have out there. If you're just focusing on that, you're missing out on the integration of that action with sports. So sometimes I saw with kids that were coming in for therapy is that they focus in on the therapy and the therapy becomes all their activities. But then what really needs to happen is you need to have all those therapies be integrated with an activity or sport activity. And then you start to see those therapies will build upon the sport activity, and the sport activity will build upon the therapies. And so really need that whole integrated approach. So the time you spend on practicing matters. How you practice, your focus is important. Kind of goes along with you improve the skills that you practice. Once you stop practicing, the benefits diminish. Interestingly enough, in that martial arts study, when they looked at the martial arts, they stopped. 30 days later was when the effect diminished. 30 days later after it. Now, I'll speak to it from a personal experience. I've had kids come to me, like I remember one kid, he came to me when he was 7. I think he did it for about like 3 years and then stopped and didn't see him for like 2 years. And then he comes back in and I'm like, do you remember anything? He's like, I don't know. Like your typical answer. And I'm like, all right. And I set them all up. 2 classes. Boom. Got it all. Remembered. And that was 2 years later. So anyways, need to challenge the individual to their limit. Importance of social connection. We were talking about that. The social connection is the motivation too. We can't forget that. And especially kids with learning disabilities, sometimes it's hard to get that social connection. It's funny. I did in one of my classes at the Y. We were in class, and it felt like an ADHD meeting. And we're sitting there, and one kid is like just walking around. And I'm not your strict instructor where I'm like, get in line. That's not the way it's supposed to be done. I kind of let them kind of like find their way. And I kind of guide them back into. But one kid was just walking around, and then eventually he just looked at me and he goes, I'm sorry, it's just my ADHD. And I'm like, no problem, me too. And then another one just pops up and goes, wait, you have ADHD? And then another one pops up and goes, wait, you have it too? And then all of a sudden they just realized the whole class was ADHD. And so it was like, no one knew until that moment. It was hilarious. But, and I thought it was good because then all of a sudden everybody had a social connection and everybody was like, okay, cool. So enjoy your passion and have fun. She also puts that in there as well. So Michael Mercenich is a neuroplastic, he's like the leading researcher on neuroplasticity from the past like 30 years. He says, in the end, only the brain through its intrinsic plastic process can sustain or repair itself at the level required to sustain high functionality. So the idea is, and what he was saying is you can't just target, and he was talking about pharmacology. You just can't target a specific area of the brain. So we're always trying to find that target area, that magic pill, the magic exercise, the magic, whatever it is that's going to change. But let's get rid of the magic pill that we're going to look for and realize that we have to do the whole thing. And when you look at doing the whole thing, I mean, that may include medication because the medication can be a primer to help stimulate the cognitive process. It also can help quell some of the motor and behavioral issues that you can then add in the cognitive process along with this, and also help them focus on just doing an activity where we can then add in the cognition. So in this regards, he also says that you can't just target one area. You got to do the whole area, and you got to address all the areas of the brain. You just can't just do one. So looking for that one specific exercise, or looking for that one activity, we really have to be more diverse and let them expand. And it's better for their health and development too, because then they get experience all these different motions. They also get introduced to different teaching styles. And there's not one teaching style, and there's not one learning style either. We need to, and what they're really looking at is, and even with the embodied cognition, what they're looking at is trying to integrate the kinesthetic aspect, with the auditory, with the movement, or with the with even your vision, and you're embodying that into your environment. That goes back to even like the 60s with Noah Kephart, who did the perceptual motor programs. And what happens is the more that you have a connection, or what he called a perceptual motor match, is when you connect all these senses at the same time in the learning process, the closer you are to reality and having a real experience. And that's what really helps with that. That's what helps with the recall and retention. So you're trying to engage the whole brain at all times, and trying to engage it with the cognition as well. And you'll see when some of those, I was looking through some of the articles back there, and they have all this stuff that I've talked about. And so there's a lot to do. But like I said, I want us to keep our minds open to all the different possibilities. We have to be flexible as teachers, parents, educators, to be able to jump in and find that learning opportunity, and sometimes also create it so it happens, and not create it so that I can sit there and say, oh, look what I did. No, create it so that the student comes to me. And this is the biggest compliment that I get when I get from the, look what I learned. Look what I found from this. And that's what I look for. That's when I'm like, okay, good. Because I want them to own it, because that's not just be taught it and given, well, this is what you said, this is what I want them to come back to me and say, look at what I learned, look at what I figured out. And so some of these, the way I teach the martial arts is almost like a puzzle for them to kind of sometimes figure out. I'll teach them a pattern and say, hey, now figure out the pattern, now do the pattern a different way. And then so it develops a nice visual spatial skill, as well as a problem solving skill as well. So with that, I think I'll stop. Yes, questions? Yes, absolutely. When do I? Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. You'll start to see when they start to kind of like back away from wanting to do it, or they start to kind of like, yeah. And that's a good way to do it. Sometimes it's like good that they are in different things, and you're giving it. I think what you're doing is this is where you can look at intensity and duration and frequency. So you can do a lot of different activities with not really much intensity on it. There's not much focus, and so therefore you're taking the stress off them, and they're just doing it for play. So we got to look at it like they really need to be active, like we say an hour a day, but really they really should be active like 8 hours a day. So yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yep. Yep. So, yeah, no problem. Okay, so in that regards, it really, even if I take from what Adele Diamond says in the research, it matters the instructor and not the style. In some regards, it really matters to the instructor. That's the challenge. Look at the program and look out how they are. I think of a program that doesn't have to be locked into a contract, because and one that kind of is a little bit more. I was going to say one that's not as rigid, that focuses on tournaments, I would say. So, if you're, that might be something that they may want to do, especially when they're just learning. Some of the kids that come to me, they don't want to do the tournaments. They just want to do the forms. And to be honest with you, some of the kids that do this the belts don't matter in some regards. They just want to learn the moves, and they just want to do the moves, and they find the benefit from just doing the moves. So there's those kind of martial arts instructors that'll sit there and also be patient enough to do that. And why I say maybe not the competition in this particular, because there might be more pressure to kind of like, be more perfect at the movements, because you want to compete and you want to make sure that you're doing it this way. Whereas an instructor that would maybe say, okay, we're just going to work with them and see how they develop through the program, it was probably better choice. So, and like I said, I don't think it matters I think it matters in the fact that if they do katas or forms, I don't say that. I would more in the research, they'll say the traditional style martial arts that focuses on forms are a better match than the ones that are more focused on just the sparring or the fighting. Okay. Yes. Right. 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 Yes. Right. Well, I think that's the challenge is, to find that time, and you have to carve that time out, and to do it, because a lot of times I even hear from kids, it's like, I don't have the burden of school. And it's amazing to me, because they're like, oh, I have to, some kids are like, I'm like, well, you have time right after school, just, practice. And the anxiety that they have over their homework is amazing to me. So the phone too, yeah, I guess, yeah, they're more interested on that, and in some of them. But I also we need to just try to I try to tell them 5 minutes, and then start to build on that. And I tell them, and I show them too, is like when I have them want to practice, I'm like, how long did it take you to do that? And I'll do a short little version for them. And I'm like, how long did it take you? It took you like 2-3 minutes. You have 2-3 minutes you can do. And I think that's where we got to start. Because I think in this, even with COVID now, it's like, I think they also got kind of like used to the sedentary. Yeah. They yeah. Right. Yes. Yes, I think and I think what we need to do is really need to carve out some strategies for them for each, within their own schedules of how they can manage that, and then also help them, ideally is like even when they're, at recess or at lunch, have that time to walk around, or even, in between classes. I know with the ones that move between classes, at least they have a little bit of activity, but some of them need that little extra more, that boost to go ahead and do this. Just have to figure out how to do that within the school day, but summer's coming up, so it's also another way to kind of like, increase the activity for them during the summer, which would be, good. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes, it is. In some regards, I think I think the effect of how to do work with that is, and this is where I think sometimes I've also saw with some of the autistic spectrum, and the reason why I changed the patterns, and I also changed sometimes the structure so that it challenges them, so they don't get comfortable in that, or they get used to being uncomfortable with that. So they have a comfortness of knowing what's going to be predictable and and what's going to be expected. But then once that happens and I find that there's a good day, then we learn how to kind of like change that pattern. And so that that's the way to kind of like redirect when they are having a bad day, of how to how to get them to kind of see how to redirect their thought process. And I know, I think it was Jeffrey Schwartz that does the brain lock. I don't know if you read that one. Jeffrey Schwartz brain lock. Yeah. So with brain lock, he has a program, or a program that will set up where you recognize recognize the thoughts, then you have to revalue the thought, and then you have to then address and change the thought by changing your motor patterns. And then once you change the motor patterns, and you have to kind of like do those motor patterns for like 15 minutes, so that then the initial recognition of that impulse then starts to be diminished, because we're using the actual motor patterns to actually inhibit the other ones. So, mm-hmm. Yes, that is a weird. Okay. So I would look at that book and give you a way to start to. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So I would look at it in this regard. Maybe maybe the action of doing the basketball and having them just shooting, but also they're calculating distance, and they're calculating all these different strategies. So I would sit there and say, have them, all right, we're going to try and shoot the ball from this perspective, and then change the perspective. Okay, now let's shoot it from this perspective, so that and I would probably map it so that he would sit there and go, okay, so if I was at this end of the court on this side shooting it, and then I'm going to go to the opposite side and I'm going to shoot as well. I think that starts to organize your brain to start to organize things in that fashion. So it's like, I'm creating a geometry and or even a physics kind of grid from the basketball court, so that you can then you can start mapping out where, rather than doing it random, then you can actually, from that point you start mapping it out, like where he is in one point, and then doing it completely to the other side, but equally. And then once you do that, then you can do random kind of like, but he'll then have that whole court mapped out. And so I think that would be an idea of how to organize, at least get the brain to start to see patterns of organization. But then with the OCD, I would also watch it on that. So, yeah. Yeah, you can, and then there's layups, and there's a whole bunch of things that you can, and then you can build in on the skills. I think that would help, or at least give him something to kind of, if anything, don't forget, we can also use the exercise. And I didn't say this as much because I was focused more on the cognition, but we can also use the exercise as just like shut the brain down, and just like, let's do this without thinking kind of thing. And let's just have fun and see what happens, and then let the spontaneous, everything just happen. And then what you can do, and this is almost like meditation. Then this is like a moving meditation, which is whatever thoughts come in, you just let go. It's like, okay, I accept it, but let it go. So there is another component to exercise that I didn't entertain. I'm sorry, but and I think I think that would be another reason why you can do it that way, and you can totally omit the brain and just let the body go. So, and that also like help them let go of control and stuff. So, yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the idea then would be to maybe reflect upon the game and see the multiple pathways or multiple opportunities that they can do, and that would bring in a cognitive component to something that he already does. He may already do that, but that would just be something that maybe if he verbalized it and kind of like expressed it in that fashion, it would make it a little bit more, real, where you could start to say, oh, that person did this, and I could have, either I could have, or I saw that they were over there, or they did a cool move this way, and I saw how they were set up this, so it brings him to be a little bit more refined in his skill. And then he also can start to see how he can start to strategize from just doing the games. And then looking at the skills that he does in practice, what we can do is we can start to sit there and say, okay, you're doing the skill, why? Where's that skill affect into your game, into your, what kind of muscles are we working here? And that, Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like get him to kind of like, kind of like recognize what's going on rather than, because he's in a state of like automatic, just I'm just going to do it. So there's no, and sometimes what happens is when you do that, you don't, your brain doesn't really, you know, get involved in it. So if you really want to pull more of that cognitive component in, you can get him to start strategizing and see what's going, Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Perfect. All right. Okay. Okay. So they are doing it. Okay. But in some regards, it's good. One, if they are feeding him the information, then he's getting an idea of how to formulate these strategies and these thoughts. And then that goal would be kind of achieved by doing that, which is really good, I think. And this way they can be more prepared in that regard. So I think, yeah, he is challenging the brain, but it might be good too to just get him to do um, to do something else, or just if you wanted to have him. I know he's probably just stuck on soccer, and I remember those days too. It was like, oh, I'm focused on this. This is what I want to focus on. And it's good, but I don't know if he does weight training along with it. Okay, so I think that's another thing that you can add in with weight training with sets and so forth with in that component. I think that would really be beneficial not only from a physical standpoint but also for his brain as well, because you're going to get a different action of those muscles. So yeah, yes. Oh, good. Oh yes. I think it can. Number one, it'll address it in a different way. It'll address it from a social standpoint. And I think that's a big boost, because then you're going to have more motivation, and they're not going to have that pressure of kind of having to perform at the varsity level. Right. So look, if we take any kid who's not active and we just give them activity, you're going to have an increase in cognition and an increase in brain function. Okay, so it's the mere fact of like the plateau effect that'll happen. So once it becomes the same old, then you're going to start to see there's not going to be as much of an improvement. You're going to see a status quo. So the idea would then be, do we want them to be varsity? No. Do we want them to be? But what we want to do is just continuously have them improve on their skills that they're learning, and if that's the case, then you're going to see, that boost in brain function by doing that. So I think that's really the key behind that. Is you're getting to be active. The more activity they do, the more oxygenation and neurotropic factors are happening. Now what we need to do is just say, okay, what do we, and this is where you get specific, what do you want to achieve? This is where it becomes more creative for all of us. What do you want them to improve in their cognition? And then that's where you introduce that. So it would then take a little bit more of whoever's directing that program to where they want to lead it to. So, I have a tendency to be more mathematically inclined for it. And then this goes with the visual spatial skills and all the mapping. And as a chiropractor, I want the kids to have good posture. And so I'm going to be focused on that. And that's where my focus, starts to excel in. And that's what I bring. But I also know there's other things, and I know there's other teachers, and I know there's other instructors, and I know there's other, and they bring, a wide variety of other, other cognitive components that can be added in as well. Yes. Why I have a program here at the Y, Wilton. Oh yeah, Wilton Y. Yes. 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 Yeah. I also see in my office too. As individual or teach them martial arts as well as do any the chiropractic physical activities or therapeutic exercises as well. Yep. Yep. I help them get through and help them with their motor coordination. So a lot of times with motor coordination, if we work on their spine and work on their stability, you can start to see that they'll be able to improve in some of their coordination skills too. So, with that spinal stability, neck stability. Yeah. Yeah. Those are. Yeah, because what happens is if you don't have a stable base, stable core, then you get slop. And then it becomes, it's hard to coordinate the arms. So what we do is we look to see if we can stabilize their core and get them stronger and get them. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. So yeah, it does make it does compound. It makes it a little bit worse than you think it is, and then you start teaching them just a little bit of these exercises, and then you start to see a little bit of a difference and an improvement, and then they can then grow from there. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming.